Hello, I'm Penny Thornton and I'm talking astrology. On this video, I'm going to be talking about the all-important Sun-Pluto conjunction of the 20th, 21st of January, which of course is also the period of the inauguration. And this seems to me to be a particularly powerful point in the year, as indeed does the whole run-up to the inauguration and a little bit beyond as well. We're seeing a lot of very, very powerful alignments, and they're all very meaningful, whether they're meaningful for us on an individual level or they are for global affairs. And I'm going to concentrate my words on this video in relation to things going on worldwide. This is what we call my mundane astrology take. I'm going to be doing 12 separate videos using the same period of time to address what's going on for you individually as sun signs. So it's quite a big agenda, but divided up on this occasion. But first off, what should I say but a happy new year? This is my first video of the year, and this is why I decided to do things a little differently, change it up just a little bit. But also, there are a couple of things that I really want to talk about before we get into the astrology, and that is the year aheads, which I do in PDF form at the start of every year. And these are very popular, but if you're new to my channel, you might not know about them, and you have to go to my website, astrolutely.com, and there you'll be able to download them. It's quite a big project because a good part of that is to do with global events, what I'm looking at astrology-wise, so covering things like Ukraine, Russia, Putin, regime change, the Pope, King Charles. There are a lot of things packed into there, which I'm sure you'll find interesting. But the bulk of these year aheads are about the individual shape of things to come. So I'm looking at Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto in every sun sign's forecast, and they're all of them going to be between two signs this year. So we're covering two signs. And this, I think, is an enormous value when we come into a year and we think, what do we want this year to be? And can astrology help us fulfill our hopes, our dreams, and our ambitions? And the answer is an unqualified yes. And it all comes down to ourselves. And if we know what the planets mean and the trends and the shape of things, we can harness our will and our emotions, if you liked, what's going on, and we can shape our own destiny. We put the power back in our hands. We don't leave it all out there to be tossed about by fate, so to speak. The other thing I wanted to talk about was that Steve Judd and myself are putting a conference together. Well, it is put together, in fact, and that starts on the 20th of February through to the 23rd. We have about 2 or 3 places left. That's it. So if you want to be part of this exciting and kind of intimate gathering, it's called Decoding the Divine. So we are focusing really on things to do with our personal growth, but also all things global, which is what Steve and I like to look at as well. And of course, it's in quite an intimate setting. There'll be major talks, and then there'll be small spin-off groups with just a handful of people. So you've got plenty of time to get to know all of us and also to add to your own personal wisdom as well. So if you want a little more detail about all of this, then you'll find a link in the description box, the description box. And of course, I may be able to put a little link on the screen right now, but I'm not the tech magician here. I'm the astrological magician. So let's get going. And I'm going to get going really first off by talking about this big Sun-Pluto conjunction. As you know, Pluto went into Aquarius in March 2023, and it's been out back into Capricorn, coming back into Aquarius again. But finally, on November the 19th last year, it arrived in Aquarius, and it is now moving forward for the next 20 years in this air sign. So the Sun-Pluto conjunction each year is always going to be a big starting point. And at the moment, it's, of course, around the time of the inauguration in America. And since America is such an important country, what goes on in America tends to affect the whole of the world. So it is a big world moment, a historical moment. And the astrology is certainly reflecting the enormity of all of this. Now, when we talk about a Sun-Pluto conjunction, we think about the sun's power coming together or be on the same degree as Pluto, whose principle is transformation. So we get a big change with Pluto. And we think about the myth of Pluto, we think about the deity Pluto, who was the deity of the underworld, and how that underworld was both a fearful place. This is where the souls of the dead went after they died, but yet it was a place of great riches, enormous treasure in Pluto's kingdom. And of course, then we get the Persephone myth flowing into this, with Pluto abducting Persephone and keeping her in his kingdom. But due to an agreement that was made with Demeter, the mother, then Persephone was allowed up into Earth for 6 months, and that is the time nature returned, which is why we get this idea of death and rebirth with Pluto. And it is really playing into these times. When we think about Aquarius, this sign that has so much to do with being light years ahead, taking us into a whole new era. And we've already got all those things coming together with artificial intelligence, and we're thinking about space and what else is out there? Is there life in outer space? And are we going to see more about, other civilizations out there? Well, this is all much in the talk. And of course, it's very reflective of Aquarius. So Pluto is going to be using its great transformational powers to really transform our understanding of these things, and also to completely change our lives. But one of the words that I like most of all about Pluto is reformation, reformation. And when I use that word, I think most of us go back to the idea of the Reformation, where Martin Luther pinned those, I was trying to remember how many they were, but on the cathedral door, and that really effectively ended the power of the Catholic Church with all the ramifications of finance and everything else. And hey, isn't that very interesting? This is the original Martin Luther. But on the day of the inauguration and the Sun-Pluto conjunction, it's Martin Luther King's, the day we celebrate Martin Luther King's, life and death. This is a special day. And it's really resonating with the whole idea of the Reformation. And of course, Martin Luther King Jr. Was also a great reformer. So we really have the symbolism, alive with this kind of symbolism about how everything is going to be reformed at the time of this inauguration. And I thought one of the things I would do, because you know what I am, I'm a great researcher, I bothered to track down what the theme of this this particular inauguration is going to be, and therefore it's the stamp really on the administration as Donald Trump's presidency gets going, and that is, I must say it correctly, is our enduring democracy, a constitutional promise. That's the heading that goes with this particular inauguration. We might come back and analyze that a little bit more, but certainly on a Sun-Pluto conjunction, this is absolutely what you would expect, that coming into a new era, everything is going to be different. So I thought I would put up the chart of the inauguration first so that we can take a look at it, and I will take you through a few more details about what it portends and what we're looking at. So let's have a look at this chart right now. As you can see, I've drawn in some configurations here because when we get important configurations, it means that planets, certain planets, it depends how many is in a particular configuration, 3 or 4, sometimes even more, are really resonating at the same pitch. We've got the degree areas, which mean that as soon as something hits one end of a particular configuration, it's going to bounce off or trigger or resonate with all the others. So that's why they're really, really important, because you're not just looking at one thing, you're looking at everything else that is caught up with that configuration. So as we look at this chart, if you follow my red lines here, you'll see that at the time of the swearing in, 12 noon in Washington, D.C., 14 degrees of Taurus is rising. That means Venus is the ruler of the chart, and you will notice up there that Venus is conjunct Saturn. We'll talk about that in a minute. But what my eye was certainly drawn to was the position of Mars. Mars is on the IC, which means it's at the bottom of the IC axis. It's on one of the 4 angles of the chart. And Mars, of course, is rather important at this period of time because it is still in opposition to Pluto. And of course, the Sun is conjoining Pluto. And as we then go forward and we look at this configuration, we'll see that Mars is caught up in a big grand cross. We have Mars opposing Mercury, and we have the Moon opposing Chiron. And each one of those points squaring, each one of those planets squaring the other. So this is an angle of tension, but as I often talk about these things, I think friction is a good word, because when you think about friction, you think about 2 sticks rubbing together and producing a spark, heat, light, energy. And that's how you want to think of all configurations, really. They're all about friction to a certain extent, and they all produce a spark. It is quite interesting to look at this particular configuration, the Moon representing the people, if you like, and that is opposing Chiron, being squared by Mars and squared by Mercury. And it's putting forward a rather interesting kind of combination here, because when we put the Moon and Chiron together and we think about a Moon opposing Chiron, we see this as a principle which can go 2 ways. We think about the people, of course, which is the Moon, and we think about fighting for the people or a fight against the people. And we have this enshrined in this particular inauguration chart, that this is either an administration, a president who will fight for the people of America, or there will be a fight against, the people will be pitted against the administration. This is a wait and see situation. We're also looking at, as I said, this Mars, the Sun is opposed to Mars, Sun is conjunct Pluto, Mars is opposing Mercury as well, and that's all tied up with a square to the Moon. So here we have Mars, the principle of action, the principle of war, the principle of conflict. So we certainly can see with the opposition to Mercury and the square to the Moon that this is going to be an administration in which there's a lot of talk, a lot of fighting talk. And remember, Trump's byword really in the run-up to the election was fight fight, fight. And we really have that principle emblazoned in this chart. But again, Mars is square the moon. So here we have, is this fighting for the people or is it against the people? And in all of this with Mercury, we have communication, we have discussion, and we think particularly about the importance of communication, especially in this election up until November, how important all the social media channels were, and how in a way that they almost overtook the main news channels, who were to a certain extent a little bit bound by what they could say. And I think enshrined again in this particular configuration, we see the importance of social media, free speech, but also the downside of all that free speech and the aggro that tends to be, that you're getting a lot of aggro here. And notice that Mercury is in the area of justice. This is about law and order. So you've got this configuration taking us into the area of law and order. So there's going to be a lot of discussion over things to do with the Constitution, justice, sort of rewriting of laws, and perhaps also we could see here some laws that may be seemingly to work against the people, but we have to give this a chance. Let's, wait and see. I also want to look at this other configuration here, which is the kite. And the only reason this becomes a kite formation is that the south node is opposition Neptune, and of course the north node. And let's not forget that wherever the north node is, we're looking at the eclipse points of the year. This is where eclipses take place. So whenever you've got a planet up close and personal to the north node or the south node, we know that this is a really important, statement here. So Neptune is a very important figure in this astrological landscape. And we can see the kite formation, which is often considered to be quite favorable because there is harmony within it. Neptune is at the apex of this configuration. So we've got ideals, we've got belief, we've got religion, we've got the media actually also with Neptune. And so we can see that this is going to be an administration high on kind of ideals and high, really, in a way, on changing things that influence us. And perhaps we could say with Neptune, influence us, undermine us surreptitiously. Neptune is always about what you can't see in a way. But that little configuration that forms the top of the kite is Uranus, sextile Neptune, sextile Pluto, and of course the Sun in this case. And that's a nice little arrangement of these planets. And all through, well, not all through 2025, but through a large part of 2025, this configuration will be with us. And I talked about this on other videos, saying it really is the signature on all things nuclear. I want to say here that I'm not saying that there's going to be any nuclear kind of engagement. That's not what I'm saying. But all these things like plutonium, uranium, neptunium, part of the nuclear program, if you like, it's going to be a significant part, and we're going to definitely see through the course of 2025 some amazing new weaponry. We're going to discover that there are weapons now being developed that are almost straight out of science fiction. And, well, I'm kind of digressing off the inauguration here, but in a way, when we look at a chart like this, that's what we're doing. We're seeing into it all sorts of potential. The Venus-Saturn conjunction is important. Venus is the ruler of the chart, and it's conjunct Saturn, and it's also squaring Jupiter. Now, the Jupiter-Saturn square, again, I've done a couple of videos on that particular configuration. We're always looking at affairs of state and constitutional matters. And it's quite interesting when we think about the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction of 2020, if if my mind serves me well. We are now really at that point where we're seeing whether those things that were in play at that time are proving to be useful, or are they going to be changed? And I think we can see that they were definitely changed, because that was the beginning of the Biden administration, and now we've changed that and we're on to a whole new administration. But I think that this also lends a kind of sense of how important the justice system is going to be in 2025. And I suspect there's going to be a lot of changes within that whole, justice system. Let's just keep it like that. But the other thing here, if you remember, the title of this inauguration is about democracy and preserving the democracy. And I think you do get an idea of that with that Venus-Saturn conjunction squaring Jupiter. You get a feeling that is a genuine aim, and the title of the inauguration does in fact reflect it. However, we have to really think with common sense here. We know Donald Trump is going to be very radical. We already know that Elon Musk, his right-hand man, so to speak, is busy bringing in a very far-right agenda. So there are going to be sweeping changes to the Constitution. So in a funny way, this is an interesting aspect, because it might say, okay, that's what you want to do, but here we have democracy here being preserved by this particular aspect, Jupiter squaring Venus and Saturn. Other things I want to point out in this chart are of great importance, is that the Jupiter, and that's at the 8 o'clock position of this circle, that is the US descendant. It's actually 12 of Gemini, but it's near enough. And also the US Uranus is 9 of Gemini. So we've got Jupiter playing on those important points of the US chart, which suggests that because it's the descendant of the US chart, we're looking at partners. We're looking at who the US partners up with. So there's quite a lot of change going on here, and quite a lot of friction, even though at the end of the day, probably good things are going to come out of all of that. The other thing to look at is the moon in this inauguration chart. We've got the moon at 18 of Libra, and the US Saturn is at 15 degrees of Libra. So we've got a play on Saturn as well here, which supports the idea of let's preserve democracy. But I also think the fact that the moon, which represents the people in this inauguration chart, that it picks up with Saturn, to me says there is repression. There are hard times coming. It's not going to be a golden era for the peoples of America. It's going to be hard times. And that's just something that's etched in this particular chart. And again, this isn't anything to do with my political persuasion or anything. It's just, it is what it is. That's what we're looking at. Most important, and let me take you up to the midheaven of the chart, 26 degrees Capricorn, 17 minutes. The US natal Pluto is 27 of Capricorn, 33 minutes. So we have the United States Pluto being brought out in this inauguration chart. Now, we've already had the Pluto return. It was occurring, it has been, in play for the last couple of years. And I talked about Pluto not so very long ago, and the idea of death and rebirth. So it's the death of one regime, the rebirth of another. It's a new incarnation of America. And that's really, really shown in this chart, because it is the US Pluto, and we have a Sun-Pluto conjunction. So everything will change from this this point of the inauguration. So all those principles, Reformation is really stamped firmly in this inauguration chart. I realize I've been talking about preserving democracy when in fact it's our enduring democracy in the title, but it's still the idea of preserving the status quo or the democracy that's the heart of America. But as I said, I think that that's probably, as we looked at that chart and as we also think about the radical 2025 Project 2025 agenda, which is definitely being played out as we see, that is going to take America into a very, very new era. Now, other things I wanted to point out, if we come back to this chart again, I want to point out to you the shaping of the chart. I love chart shapings. I use them a lot. And we've got an interesting one here. We've got a bowl shaping. All the planets, with the exception of the moon, are in the span of half a hemisphere. So that creates a bowl. And one of the characteristics of a bowl shaping is that it suggests a mission. And I think this grows very, very well with this administration. They're on a mission to change America radically from the roots up. It's all going to be very different. There may never be another election again, which was another promise Donald Trump made. So these are things worth bearing in mind. And we also have the moon standing out as the kind of handle of that bowl, or as I have sometimes talked about it being the spoon to the bowl, because it's that particular singleton that is the channel or the focus or the steering mechanism of all of this. And as you can see, this particular configuration is going to be there for a while. And the moon is the only thing moving fast enough around the chart to start to angle the bowl shaping and to form connections with the various planets contained in the bowl. And when we think about the moon in this chart, this is all about the people again. So are we thinking about the people as the spoon stirring it all up? Certainly the people here are looking as though they have a great deal to say in all of this. And we cannot forget that Mars-Pluto opposition, in this case, Mars opposition Sun-Pluto and also Mars opposition Mercury, that the chances are there is going to be a lot of friction, which is good in the sense that that creates a spark, creates energy, and things move along. But also it can be enormously destructive. And I think with Mars in that, or on the IC, which means it's a fourth house Mars being the homeland, we can see that a lot of strife and a lot of friction is going to happen in the homeland itself. So in this chart, there's so much to read in this chart, and we will come back and look at it again because it is so extraordinary. And we will check out the various things that happen. But we've already seen the first example of domestic terrorism on January the 1st in New Orleans, which was utterly tragic and terrible. But I'm afraid to say that I think it's the sign of things to come. And this is what you get when you look at Mars on this angle of this inauguration chart. I also want to mention here, and come back to me again for this bit, that we talk about a Sun-Pluto conjunction, and I talk about a new era, and this inauguration in a way being like no other. And of course, there are a couple of reasons why this inauguration is like no other. We do have a president who's been in power before, so here he comes again after a gap. It's not the first time it's happened in American history, but it's very, very rare. I think it is only one other occasion. So here we have an ex-president, a former president coming back to run the country. But we have a president who has been convicted of a crime. And in fact, only 10 days before the inauguration, he will be sentenced for that crime. So that's in the hush money case, if any of you have forgotten. So that's, really quite an extraordinary factor. So we are really Sun-Plutoing this, really, this is, a new era. We've never had this happen before. And also, I think this is interesting, former President Jimmy Carter died on the 29th of December, so just prior to this inauguration, and it was like the passing of the old style of presidential administration. This was a kind of the old giving way to what we don't know will be the new as it comes in at the end of January. And I think, also when we think about the death of Jimmy Carter, which is always sad to lose a man who became great as he left office in a way. He was a great man for peace and human rights, and right to the end. He was a simple man, but his heart was for the people, and of course he won the Nobel Peace Prize. So many things about him, and the dying of that era is very profound just before this Sun-Pluto conjunction. But because President Carter died, all the flags will be at half-mast for the inauguration, and that really sets a precedent. There's never ever been a situation where that has happened. So we can see we are marking this, the synchronicities that are happening in the real world in real time are reinforcing the symbolism that we see in the astrology. A couple of other things I want to mention here are first is the fact that Mr. Trump will be holding, or President-elect Trump will be holding a victory rally just hours before, the day before the inauguration. So all these familiar kind of, aspects that I've been talking about are in there as well. And I'm quickly going to show you the chart of the victory rally, because, it moves things around into a sort of different space of the circle. But I think you can see here, what's important is that Saturn is conjunct the midheaven and very closely conjunct Venus as well. So this is a really, really dominant feature of this chart. The Sun-Pluto conjunction is in the 8th house. The moon, which is the ruler of the chart, the earliest stages of Libra, it'll go fully, as we saw in that other chart, it reaches 18 of Libra by the time of the inauguration. But given that this is a victory rally, and when we think about that is going to be a celebration for the troops, so to speak, let's celebrate everything that we've worked so hard to bring about. I think that this is a very somber affair. And of course, we see the Mars-Pluto opposition, the Sun-Mars opposition. It's all in there. It's all taking place at the same time. So, I'm not a kind of, I'm not necessarily, thinking of this as a victory rally. To me, it almost seems more of a wake. But anyway, let that be as it might be, which brings me on to yet another chart that I want to show you. And this chart is the chart of the full moon in Cancer. And this is taking place on the 13th of January. And I think this is an important chart to look at. And this is the focus, in a way, of what I'm going to be talking about for every sign of the zodiac on their separate videos. Now, why is this full moon so important? Well, it's important because, as you can see here, you can see the moon over in the 9 o'clock position of the chart conjoined to Mars and opposing the sun. And that too now brings about a little configuration all of its own. It's like an envelope, because we've got Mars sextiling and the moon sextiling Uranus, Uranus sextiling Neptune, Neptune sextiling the sun. And of course, the sun and moon are in opposition, so they're taking the base here. So it's a kind of squished up envelope. And one of the hallmarks of an envelope shaping, and remember, whenever you've got planets grouped around a same degree in different signs, they're all going to be triggered at the same time. There's something about an envelope, which is that you don't know. There's a secret. So I think that this period of January as a whole is about revelations. And of course, Pluto can also be seen. A Sun-Pluto conjunction is about bringing what is buried up to the surface. So we get to see what's been concealed. And we've got this theme playing in different ways, really, from about the 3rd of January. And just for the record, I'm recording this on the 5th of January. So the Mars-Pluto opposition has come and gone, but it was certainly over events in that first week of January, which was very stormy and turbulent, whether you were in South Korea or Tbilisi in Georgia or Belgrade, wherever you were, lots and lots of protests and upsets and terrible tragedies and terrorism going on at that particular point. And of course, over in America again, there was great concern over the choice of the speaker, voting in the speaker, because without a speaker, you're not going to be able to certify the election. So it was a lot at that period of time, which was very tense. And I think certainly, although at the end of the day, speaker was chosen, everything stayed, as I pretty well said it was or would in my Friday Bite. It took a lot. It took a lot of Machiavellian movements going on to get through. And we continue on through here. Just before this full moon, we've got Donald Trump being sentenced for in the hush money trial. Now, although he is going to be unconditionally, whatever you call it, he's not forgiven, but that's not going to. He's not going to go to jail. None of that's going to happen. It's just almost completing the process of judgment. The court process has been finished with a sentence. That's what it's all about. But it still is a little bit of a blow for Mr. Trump, who is heading towards this triumph of winning the presidency for the second time. And it's sort of not a good look, we might say. But I think there's sort of trouble in here as well. And I think it's this background of violence and eruption. And Mr. Trump certainly isn't safe. He's not safe from random acts of violence, and he's not safe from revelations. And we may see around this time, at this full moon, some other information coming to light, which is very uncomfortable. Now, there have been a lot of predictions by psychics and, mystics who have suggested that Mr. Trump would never take power. But I think how that is read, I don't know. I've only got the astrology, and I use this, I say my little gray cells to kind of figure things out. So I can't say whether, he's not going to make it to the inauguration. But what we can see is that there is a pall over the inauguration as we looked at that chart, whether it's the flags at half-mast, whether it's Mr. Trump coming in as a convicted felon, all those things don't make for, that sense of, greatness and, all of that. It's not in there. But it may be that in this run-up, and maybe we're seeing it slightly in this full moon chart, again, set from Washington, because that's what we're talking about at this time, this idea that there are further rumblings of misdeeds and shenanigans going on that will, at the very, very least, cloud the inauguration and the beginnings of the new Trump administration. And I think, in fact, I know that I said in my year aheads that, Trump probably will not stay the entire full term of his administration. And I think we need to look towards March and April, particularly April, in fact, because as we look at the Mars-Pluto opposition and we think about that was exact on the 3rd of January. Before that, it was exact for the first time at the 3rd of December. And the third time it comes together as a final Mars-Pluto opposition will be on the 27th of April, 2025. And that happens to be a new moon. The sun will be squaring Pluto. There's a lot going on. And so I think that whatever is being seeded at this point, and whatever little rumblings of this isn't right, or that wasn't done right, or anger or upset, all these sort of things going on in the underground, but bubbling up here and there like little volcanoes coming up and down. I think by the time we get to April, some of these things that are inchoate now are going to be seen in full, and then we might get some really, really big stuff going on in terms of the presidency. So let's bear with that. And I know there was something else that I was very keen to say. So the point I wanted to raise about this full moon is that the full moon is the end of, we begin the cycle with the new moon and we end it with the full moon. And this isn't to do with a new moon and a full moon each month. This is to do with the new moon in the sign that the full moon will be in 6 months later. So this particular cycle, and looking at this full moon here, conjunct Mars, the events around the time of this full moon, 13th of January, 10th of January, on a little bit further forward into the Sun-Pluto conjunction on Inauguration Day. If we go back to the new moon, that occurred on the 5th of July of 2024, and the events around that time are very interesting. Days beforehand, the Supreme Court issued its ruling on presidents being immune from prosecution, which is huge. It's massive. So events around the 10th and 13th of January take us back to that ruling. Also at that time, just a little bit before the presidential debate, you may remember that Biden did not do well in that debate, and it was the results and the furore that occurred in the wake of that within the Democratic Party and Democrats that led Biden to say he wouldn't stand, he wasn't going to be the presidential candidate. And what's interesting that he made that decision or announced that decision on the full moon that followed that new moon. So you can see how important these cycles are and why we have such a good opportunity to really test out the astrology as we look at it, to take us back to July last year and all those hugely important events that are now having a bearing on everything that's happening at this point of time, again, in America. But you can look at this yourself or with your own nation, go back, have a look at what was going on in July, and you'll probably find there's a resonance with this January period. Beginnings and endings, new moon beginnings, full moon endings, closure and completion, just as much a pattern in a month as they are in a 6-month cycle as well. So I am going to bring an end to my kind of astrological discussion on all these very, very powerful Sun-Pluto conjunctions. And let's remember that Sun and Pluto are conjunct in our charts somewhere and in the charts of all our nations. So this is going to be a time of radical reformation across the world. It isn't just in one place, but we've just chosen to focus on the United States because it happens to be so interesting and so vital. We know what's going on, and therefore we can really home in on what the astrology is saying. But I'm also, because this is running along the lines of my normal videos. Normally at this point, I'd be looking at the configurations 12 ways, but I'm going to do that separately. It made me think a lot about, here we are at the start of the new year, and every time we have a new year come in, our big question is, especially to astrologers, is, well, what's the year going to be like? Is it going to be a great year? And you look out and you see these configurations and you think, it's going to hurt a bit. But that made me think two things. First, that, life goes on, doesn't it? I mean, when we think about World War II, for instance, which I can remember my parents talking about, and how life was very vivid because you had to make the most of your time together. And so great love affairs were born, babies were born, new ways of living came out of the circumstances of war, violent and terrible as it was. And I think we need to look at the influences that we've got at the moment in the same way, that turbulent as they are, difficult as they are, in a way they forge great alliances in our lives and great things in our character. And regardless of what Pluto and Saturn and Uranus and Jupiter are going to be doing, we shall continue to have babies, fall in love, start new jobs. All of those things will continue, and the human spirit is strong, and the human spirit is like that. So you see this time and time again, the heroism and the courage of people in very difficult circumstances. That's what's so great about being human. So, as I said, even though the portents for 2025 aren't all beautiful, we're not singing lullabies and kumbaya. It's not like that. It's really turbulent, but life goes on and great life stories continue. And the other thing that I wanted to say, which is typical of my kind of practical side, and that is that sometimes we want to accomplish things in a year, don't we? We think about what do we want to do this year? What do we want to have happen? And we make a vow that we're going to do that. We're going to give up smoking. We're going to give up drinking. We're going to go on a great holiday. We're going to write that book, whatever it is. And we may mean it at the time, but often by the time we've got to, this point in January, we've already given up. This was meant to be dry January, and it's no longer a dry January. And all those things are very human. They're things that we all meet. But I think the important thing with wanting to achieve ambitions, wanting to fulfill your goals, is to do it in small steps. So let's say you said, I want to give up smoking. Well, and that's terribly difficult. You go one day at a time, and so if you've done Monday, let's see if you can do Tuesday. Oh, Monday and Tuesday, now see if we can do Wednesday. So it's one step after the other. And it's the same really with some of the bigger goals that we may want to do, let's say writing a book or owning your own business, whatever it may be. You need to start with a map, really, and with the hardest thing first. Let's do the thing, it's very Saturnian, isn't it? The thing that we find most difficult, the thing that's going to be most time consuming, start with that, because that's not going to put you off. Because if you go through that, you've got your groundwork. So there are many ways to make 2025 a great personal year. And it involves some of those things I've talked about. So thank you for listening, everybody. And I look forward to seeing you next time on my next video. Bye for now.